Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live Q&A for the film Just Mercy. My name is Nick Bates, Assistant Director in the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground. This is BU's Student Center for the Soul, named after Howard Washington Thurman, the former dean of BU's Marsh Chapel, who believed that meaningful and creative shared experiences can remove any barrier between people. Before I introduce our guest of the evening, I wanted to say thank you to the Office of Student Activities for hosting this event as a part of BU's Weeks of Welcome 2020, and to let you all know that you can ask questions via the Q&A functions at the end of the event, towards the end of the event, somewhere around 8:45, we'll open up for the Q&A from you all as guests. Now to introduce our esteemed guest, Destin Cretton wrote and directed the critically acclaimed feature film Short Term 12, which won the Grand Jury Prize and the Audience Award for Best Narrative Feature at South by Southwest in 2013, starring Brie Larson. He also wrote and directed the feature I'm Not a Hipster, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2012. He also wrote and directed the film The Glass Castle for Lionsgate, and he is the director of the film Just Mercy for Warner Brothers, starring Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Foxx, and Brie Larson. Please welcome Destin Cretton. This
Hi,
is part of
everybody.
the audience. You're at the audience applause.
I'm imagining it.
So where are you currently located at?
I'm in Sydney, Australia right now, and it
Okay.
is 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, which
Oh
I think
wow.
is the
So
future, right? It's a Saturday for you guys. Yeah.
so it's the future here for us folks in Boston. It's about 8 o'clock here.
Nice. But is it are you Saturday or are you Sunday?
We're Saturday.
Ah, okay. So I'm on Sunday morning. Sunday's gonna be really great, you guys. I promise you. I see it right now.
So thank you for being here with us tonight to discuss your latest film, Just Mercy. To really get us started in the conversation, one of the questions that was really on the students' heart, they wanted to know, how did you get your start in the film industry, and what was hard about finding your first role?
Um, I guess asked this question a lot about, how do you break into an industry like this? And I for me, for me personally, I think that's kind of the wrong question to be asking and the wrong thing to be trying to do, because I think you're kind of setting yourself up for a lot of disappointments if your ultimate goal is to break into an industry. Uh, for me, it was all about just an obsession with storytelling and the exploration of ideas. My I mean, what filmmaking does for me is it allows me to start with a giant question and obsess over that as I figure out a story and explore a story. And sometimes that's 1 to 2 years of exploration. And it really is life affirming and enriching to me, the process of doing that. And for me, I came from, I went to a state school. I didn't really have I didn't have the pedigree behind and anything to kind of push me into this industry. Um, and anytime that I started to think that way of like, how do I become a successful director, it was paralyzing for me. But when I would redefine my goals into what I knew I could actually control, which was I could make a movie. I don't have to say I want to be a director. I can practice directing. And I can do it right now. I could do it this weekend. We have the technology and means to do that on an iPhone if you want to. And once I started having that be my goal, I was, I'd work whatever job I could for 10 years. I was working at a hotel, putting up projectors. I was a cameraman for a nonprofit during their really boring court like meetings, but I'd take it very seriously. And I did wedding videos. I worked as a youth counselor for a place like Short Term 12, the movie. And these were all jobs that I found personally fulfilling in some way, but they were also ways where that allowed me to save my money so I could plan my next short film that I wanted to do. And all of these short films were not a means to an end. They were just my passion. I would have been happy doing whatever job I needed to keep making short films or making whatever films that I could afford to make on my own. And I did that for 10-ish years. And eventually it turned into my first job, which was a documentary for the Learning Channel. And then eventually it turned into another job, and then another job, and now this is where I am. But I do feel very lucky to be able to call this a profession, but that was never my I mean, of course it was like my back of my mind dream, but for me it was to psychologically to survive. It was finding fulfillment in the things that I could control, which was making another movie, going through that process, and feeling like it was a success when I finished that process and was able to learn from it. Anything above that was icing.
That's a really beautiful narrative that you weave about releasing yourself sort of from the traditional expectations one would assume that you would feel being in this industry. So it sort of aligns with the next question. A student asked this question: how did you know it was time to submit a film to Sundance with one of your first films?
I submitted every film that I've ever made to Sundance, and it was and I got rejected every year by every movie. So again, this fits with the same thing. I don't believe in spending a lot of money on short films or any film. That I just don't, because for me, I don't want to. All my films cost me typically, a cup. At the most, it was like $3,000, but I try to keep them very, very cheap, because I don't want to drain my bank account. I mean, I would drain my bank account, but I also don't want to go into debt. And I want to keep making movies because I don't ever want the movie to feel like it's like everything's in the success of one short. So I got rejected from Sundance every year for every short that I did. Short Term 12, the short film, was my thesis project. It was also my 8th short film. And it was the first time I had not gotten a rejection letter from Sundance. So every film before that, would play at other festivals, and I wouldn't say any of them were a failure because they didn't go to Sundance, but I just kind of got, Sundance is I think they get like 10,000. I don't know what they're up to now, but 10,000 submissions every year. So, and they accept, I think 80 or something like that. I don't really know, but your chances are, it doesn't mean your film sucks if it doesn't get into Sundance. So I just feel like if you can afford the $35 submission fee, I would just submit every year. And I don't, because just know that a rejection from any festival does not mean that you suck.
I mean, $35, I would definitely, I'm tempted to, try my own hand and submit something in the future at
For
$35.
For sure.
So you sort of tell this narrative of always having faith in yourself and faith in the craft, what you enjoy. So to get into Just Mercy a little bit, it's definitely a film about faith, hope, and love. What attracted you to this project? Why were you so passionate about, filming this movie?
I read the book in a coffee shop in LA, and I was by myself, and I was just going to kind of start reading it, and I just stayed for hours and read the whole thing, and it was not only devastating with the truth that it was opening my eyes to, but it was also just so full of love and laugh. I was not expecting to laugh as much as I did and these characters were their ability to laugh in the midst of the most dire circumstances was it was just really beautiful and just represented so much of what I strive to be in life. And Brian himself, when I wasn't expected to read a book about mass incarceration and working with people on death row and turn the last page and feel invigorated and filled with hope and inspired to want to do something. And that to me is the power of Brian. Is you would think that after 30 years of working with those types of situations and watching clients literally be executed in front of him, that he would become more and more jaded with the system and more jaded with what he can actually accomplish. But he's not. You talk to him, he's one of the most positive, inspiring people I've ever met, and is so full of real hope. It's not like the fluffy like hope that it's like it's grounded, rooted, working his like sleeping 4 hours a night, working his ass off type of hope. And that was what made me really want to do something. And honestly, it was really scary for me I'm not Black. I grew up in Hawaii. I grew up very far away from these this type of situation. But I was just so moved. I didn't feel like, oh, I am the person to tell this story, but I offered myself as a person to Brian to tell this story. And when he saw Short Term 12, I think he saw how much I genuinely do care about my characters that I'm portraying, and we met, and I just fell in love with him even more, and what he wanted out of this story. And it was one of the most enriching experiences of my life, going through the process with him.
Wow. I watched a lot of press on your movie and watched you speak about Brian's presence within this film, and you tell a story of such a compassionate and joyous person. And so I really wanted to ask you this question. One of my favorite scenes in the film is actually very early in the beginning, where you see a young Brian Stevenson enter the prison, and he's there to give an update to a young man about his case, and then it evolves in sort of this 2-hour conversation, and they bond over being in the choir and what type of faith tradition that they both worship. And for me, it was so special just seeing two Black men from different backgrounds and different walks of life bonding over joyous moments. Why was that scene so important to sort of be placed in the beginning of the film?
that moment Brian describes in his book and has talked about as the moment where he where it really became cemented in him what his calling would be for the remainder of his life, and it was very much rooted in stepping into a situation like that where he felt like, I think initially he felt powerless going into this place with only, all he had was the news to tell this young man that he was not going to be executed anytime within the next year, which to anybody on the outside doesn't sound like that great of news. And and Brian wasn't an actual, he wasn't an attorney at the time. He was still an intern, and he was completely thrown off guard when the response to giving that news was met with tears and an embrace and a thank you, and it really just broke the wall down between them. And this young man told him his wife and kids, he's been telling them not to come and visit because he was afraid he might be executed at any moment because they don't tell him anything. So just the fact that he knew he had a year, now he could have his wife and kids come and visit. And yeah, they talked for I think about 2 to 3 hours, and he I think Brian just saw a true reflection of himself in this young man. And when the young man was leaving, he actually was leaving singing that hymn as he was walking down the hall. And before he left, he told Brian, just come back. He said, don't worry about me, just come back. And that was the thing that Brian points to as the moment that cemented the calling of what he would be doing.
You've adapted, I believe this is like your second film adapting a book into sort of a feature film. What is that process like for you? Are there some sort of, is there deliberation on what scenes that you want to include? And how do you feel when you leave something really good out of the film that's from the book?
For the two films that I've adapted from books were not only books, they were also very personal life stories. So it's stressful. It's stressful because I feel an immense responsibility to make something that reflects. I'm not the ultimate artist in this process. I'm trying to tell the story of somebody else's life and another artist and the way that they've told the story, and capture that in a new medium. So in this case, it really, I could not have done it if Brian was not so graciously involved throughout the entire process. And he fully understands the process of storytelling. So I would go in with Andrew Lanham, who was co-writing with me, and we go out to Alabama, meet with Brian. We met with with Anthony Ray Hinton, who had recently been released from death row, who was there at the same time as Walter McMillan, and met with a lot of Brian's lawyers at EJI, and Brian drove me down to Monroeville and showed me where the jail where Walter was kept before he was sent to death row, the courthouse where he was tried in Baldwin County, and took me to all these different places, showed me where Walter McMillan actually lived, and started with all that research, and then we would go back and start writing, and Brian was just always available whenever we needed him to fill in you typically find on any adaptations that you can't just plop the best scenes in and
Hmm.
expect them to work. You kind of start that way, and a lot of times it's the it's the glue that connects, and the connective tissue between the scenes that in this case, we really needed Brian to help fill in those gaps, because we didn't want to just make things up. So a lot of those, the way that the movie is strung together is, some of things are not directly from the book, but they are from Brian's life, and they are from other experiences that he had. So we were able to tell a story that really every moment is rooted in some experience that Brian has had during his career.
Wow. I'm really happy that, from what you articulated, that Brian was so intimately involved with the film, with you all as a cast and crew. So I have to ask you this question. Was Brian on set for some of the more emotional scenes that you all had to film? And what was that like for you all?
Brian visited set. He visited set once. We always had lawyers from EJI representatives who were there. Brian is a very busy man. I think the day that he visited set, he came straight from from arguing in the Supreme Court. So
Wow.
he's yeah, but we always had somebody there who a lot of the lawyers who were with us were with Brian at the time of this case back in the late 80s, early 90s. So we always had some representative there who could tell us how how lawyers work, how they what, because I am by no means a lawyer. So anytime there were lawyery scenes, we made sure that we had somebody there who was very clearly showing us, how they go through evidence, what are they actually looking for, and how how corrupt officers or DAs, how they can hide evidence or keep it pushed to the back. And so all of that was a huge learning experience for me, but we always had somebody on set who was making sure that we were doing something that, from Brian's words, he was, he didn't want this to be another movie that if you did the work, if you actually did the work, you would roll your eyes at certain things. He wanted everything to feel authentic to somebody who is actually doing this work. So we did our best to do that.
Got it. This is this film is like an emotional roller coaster, between the joyous scenes with the family, watching these Black men who are all facing death, right? The death penalty, but they're also bonding so intimately within the prison system as well. And they're bonding over this idea of hope, right? That Brian can do something. What was the most emotional scene to film? I have an idea, I suspect, but what do you think was the most emotional scene to film?
I mean, it definitely was the execution of Herbert Richardson, and the emotional epiphany of that scene, which really rocked me when I first understood it. And it happened when we first went down to Alabama, and Brian set up an interview with us and Anthony Ray Hinton, and we sat with Anthony Ray Hinton. Was in our movie, he's played by O'Shea Jackson, who did an amazing job. And Anthony Ray Hinton was falsely accused and condemned to death row um, quite young, and he was there actually before Walter McMillan came in, and he was spent the majority of his life on death row for a crime he did not commit, and was not even close to involved with. And so I was able to sit with him and I just ask him what it was like. One of the first things that he said was the biggest thing he remembers was the camaraderie between himself and between the cellmates, who very often, he said, you didn't even know what they looked like. You sometimes couldn't tell if they were white or black, because they weren't typically even allowed in the yard at the same time. So you just knew people by voice, and they would be shouting, having conversations between the cells, and they would create friendships that way. And one of the thing that hit me the most was because Brian talks about the death of Herbert Richardson in his book, which Anthony remembers, and he talks about how everybody would bang their cups on the bars, which I just, I assumed it was an act of protest to just make sure the guards knew that they hate this, and that there was like an act of, I imagined it was more of an aggression act where they would pound and shout and throw things or what. And when I was talking to Anthony about it, I asked him if that's what it was for, and he said it was. Of course, there's some of that, but he said it was less about protest and it was more about just they knew that their brother could hear them, and so they were letting him know that he's not going through this alone. Which,
wow,
when Anthony told me that, it was like, even now it's so emotional to think about, that the camaraderie is that rich and poignant between men who, a lot of them did do the crime, but it's like, to me, it's just, it's such a human thing to stick together and stand up for each other, and that there can be that much love between some wrongfully and some actually who committed their crime, people who have killed other people, but that much humanity is still present there was pretty mind-blowing to me. And that's to me what makes that scene just so much, so different and so unexpected, is how much love is present at the darkest moment, I think, of humanity. So much love can be present, and it was a very difficult scene to shoot, but extremely rewarding as well.
Yeah, that scene is probably, there are probably 3 or 4 moments when I watch the film that I get really emotional and I'll cry. That scene is one of them, and the scene where Walter's son stands up and says, "You can't take my father." That scene just blows me away. I want to see if you could follow me here a bit. At our campus, we have a center called the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground, where I work at primarily. It was named after the first ever Black man to hold the position of dean of a chapel at a predominantly white institution. And he is sort of this titan who was ahead of his time. He was a mentor to Martin Luther King, was very intimate and familiar with King's family as well, went to school with Martin Luther King's father. So he wrote sermons, meditation, and a series of books. And one of his meditations was called "How Good to Sinner Down." And I want to read a few lines from that, and then I want to ask you a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Um, so he says, how good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. So, in such an emotional film where you film these heart wrenching scenes, how do you take a moment to center down and sort of care for yourself in that moment?
It's I mean, it's really important, I think, for um, for anybody who's doing this. I mean, I think it's important for actors and directors and anyone who is creative to uh, to be quiet, and especially in preparation for shooting a scene like this. And each actor is different. A lot of the actors on Just Mercy really used music, uh, whether it was their own head, depending on the scene. Sometimes they'd, you know, put headphones on and just go be by themselves. I don't know what they're listening to before in prep for a scene. Sometimes Jamie Foxx would have his little Bluetooth speaker and he'd play it for everybody. And sometimes it would be just depending on a scene. If it's a fun scene, he'd be, you know, pumping fun music. Sometimes he would put on a hymn or gospel, and it would quiet everybody down. But I I do think there's so much hustle and bustle in not only the industry but on set, it is really important for scenes like this to quiet everybody down on set. So when an actor steps on, it's quiet, and it's also all of our time to look inside and remember why we are doing this, why we are uh, going through all of this, um, you know, stress and staying up late and working long hours, to quiet down before a scene like this. I think for us, it was refocusing us on the fact that this was a real human being who actually went through this experience, and we are trying to honor him in what we're doing. And um, it it was very sobering. Everything about the scene was very sobering. But we do feel, yeah, that like in some way we uh, are honoring the the life of this man, Herbert Richardson.
Yeah, absolutely. Your film deals with really some really things that are extremely prevalent in sort of our topics today as we discuss the impact of a global viral pandemic, as we discuss the impact of the pandemic that is racism. Your movie, you know, touches on these topics of mass incarceration, systemic injustices, and so as we discuss sort of prison abolition, police abolition, sort of reform or change to these systems, um, what role do you think this film can play in that narrative?
I mean, I have I've had a few pretty amazing experiences with this movie, and watching how people react to it. And one of the most poignant or memorable was after a Q&A, or after a screening in LA. It was uh, I came to the little reception afterwards. It was primarily older white, um, you know, established upper class white people who had seen it, and everyone was whining and dining, and it was fine. But this older gentleman came up to me. He was probably in his 60s, maybe even older. And he grabbed me, and as he was talking, he was a fairly, I could tell he was a proud man, but he grabbed me, and I thought he was I thought he was upset at first, but he was very passionate. And he told me, I just want you to know, I have been a supporter of the death penalty my entire life. And as he was talking, he started to tear up and cry while he was, and he said, your move, this movie completely changed my mind. I am no longer, I don't know why I would, like, why I ever supported such a thing.
Wow.
And he barely finished the words, and he just turned, I think he got embarrassed, and he turned around and walked away, and I never talked to him again. But if one, it's just, I don't know, the power of why Brian wrote this story, this book in the first place was, it roots back to that if any of you heard his TED talk, it roots back to this story that he tells about his grandma, and how his grandma would always give him these long hugs, and even when she wasn't next to him, she would shout to him and say, do you still feel me hugging you? And he, after she passed, he still feels her hugs. And one of the things that she told him while she was hugging him was that you can't understand the most important things in life from a distance. You have to get very close to it. And that idea is, we can think about these ideas of mass incarceration, of the death penalty, of like, oh, what's a humane way to execute somebody? We can, like, cognitively, like, have um, these arguments or debates, but it's not until you allow yourself to really get close to the people who are affected that you can instantly change your mind. And that's what happened with that man. I think he had a case built in his head, as to why he believed a certain thing. And this movie allowed him to get closer, unexpectedly closer to the people that are affected by that belief. And it just instantly changed his mind. And I think there are so many ways to do that. I'm glad that a movie like this exists, and there are, I mean, When They See Us did that to me. When I watch it, holy shit, that movie
Yes.
just, like, rocked me.
Yes.
And and documentaries like 13th, like all, there's so many ways that media can contribute to that. But I do think probably the most powerful way you can do it is to meet people face to face. Sometimes my personal assistant on the movie I'm on now, and also for post production in this last movie, was he was incarcerated from the time he was 15 until he was 26, 27. And and I think as soon as you meet someone face to face, and you realize, oh, somebody who goes to jail does not, like, it, they are a human being with all they are just like you. They are just like all your friends. They are, and it's something we all think we understand, but until you put yourself right in front of somebody and have a conversation and let them touch your heart and see how see yourself reflected in them, I think it's hard to be changed. But all to say, I'm glad Just Mercy exists and is in the world and is able to do that. I hope for the industry, it's one of many more to come, and that we continue to tell stories like this, to allow people to have that first step into something, I also hope that it's not, the last step that people take. I hope Just Mercy is like a introduction to um, uh, uh, much more involvement in taking steps closer to this issue.
Absolutely. When They See Us is amazing too. Another one where it took me a minute to really get through it because of just
Yeah,
the content.
yeah.
Last question I'll ask you, and then I'll get into some of our student questions. I'm going to go back to this guy, Howard Thurman, who was an amazing storyteller in his own right as well. He identified community as the single most important quest of his life. He believed reconciliation was essential to community, and he believed community, reconciliation, and love were synonymous. So he defined love as the intelligent but kind but stern expression of kinship of one individual for another, having at its purpose the maintenance and furtherance of life at its highest level. In what ways do you believe this movie helps us further understand love and reconciliation?
Um, what a smart man. um, I I think when you recognize, one, that this is a movie based on a real person who is not gone, is currently right now doing the exact same thing that you see him doing in this movie, but on a much larger level. A man who has not um, slowed down. If anything, he
At
has
all.
sped up and has worked even harder every day um, for the people in our society that are in the shadows and forgotten and are the easiest people to not uh, care about or not think about. Um, he he has lived his entire life um, dedicated to this philosophy that we are only, our country is only as great as we treat the least of those, the ones who are the poorest, who don't have all of the benefits that all of us have. That is the representation of who we are as a country. Um, and he's dedicated his life to serving those people and to building a community around the service of those people. Um, and you can see over the course of his career the power of, I'm not, yes, one man, Brian Stevenson, but one man bringing in another woman and man and a group and and you know taking people who were incarcerated and adding them to, there are many people who are incarcerated who are now working for EJI. And if you go down there, they are literally transforming Montgomery, Alabama. Their positivity, their the community outreach that they are doing has changed people's hearts and minds over the course of the 30 years that they've been there. And it's incredibly powerful and inspiring to know that it can be done. One person saw an insurmountable problem and decided to just get off his butt and drive to Alabama and do something about it, when there is no logical reason why he should have believed he could do anything to change it. And they have been, EJI has been wildly effective. That is not to say that there is not a giant mountain still to climb. But if there were, you know, more people who were passionate enough to see problems like this and put themselves in proximity to those problems to do something about it and build a community around that vision, the world would be a very different place, I think.
Wow. So we're going to do some of our student questions. We have some people who typed in some things. What role does faith play in your directing?
I mean, I think if you're going to get into whether, no matter what you believe, if you're going to be in this industry, you have to have faith. you have to have faith that, because you're walking into kind of the impossible. Every project I've ever worked on, it feels completely impossible in the beginning, and I feel completely inadequate. I feel like there is no way I'm going to accomplish. These are like my own personal battles. Every single time I start a project, I think I battle the feeling that I am going to completely screw it up.
Wow.
And part of that self-doubt, I have found, is necessary to fire me up and kind of and throw myself into the project and learn as much as I can. It also keeps me humble. I think as soon as I think cockiness can be one of the worst things you could have, especially when telling stories like this. But the faith that somehow you put one foot in front of the other and keep solving little problems every day, and the faith that eventually it's going to come together, is definitely a daily struggle. I mean, you'd also just have to, it requires a lot of faith just in general if you are stepping into an industry like this, because there is no job security. You are always project to project, and especially in the beginning, you are project to project and not getting paid anything, probably for a long time. And that's why I stress I stress the redefining of what you are doing for yourself, because I find it very sad when somebody goes to film school or has the dream of being a director or an actor or whatever it is, and I find it very sad when they go after it, and because they don't, the industry doesn't accept them, or they get rejected from festivals or whatever it is, the critics hate what you did, whatever, that they are now feel like they failed. To me, the redefining of that experience is this is what I want to do right now. This is the experience I want to have, and whether people accept it should not rob you of the experience and the personal growth of going through and charging after something that you're passionate at. And when people do reject you, which is, I promise you, it's going to happen. no matter what, it is going to happen. When people reject you, yes, I mean, you can't deny those things are going to sting. But if you're purpose and your definition of who you are and why you are doing this is not attached to other people's opinions, you will be able to do it for much longer. And that's not to say you might have to get another job. You might have to, like me, I like worked other jobs specifically knowing that they would still allow me to be creative on the weekends. Like I didn't want to get a job that would just stress me out so much that on the weekends I'd have nothing left. So I was always finding ways to still do what I was passionate at. And I think if you can do that, I think you can have a very fulfilled creative life, whether or not people accept what you're doing or not.
You speak a lot, and this is a conversation I was actually just having with one of our students. It's about how you value yourself, right? So I'm always of the mindset that I can't be obsessed with the critiques from other people, especially when I don't know if they value themselves the way I value myself, right? I just don't know. And so I'm not sure that they can really, that I can take their critique to heart because they just don't really know me at my core. And so I think that's something really special that you're articulating as it has to do with sort of your creative process, but also it seems like that's a mantra for your entire life. So I
It's
just
been
want to compliment that.
it's been a mantra since I was when I was in college. There are, you know, growing up in Hawaii, growing up as an Asian American, like that, and then moving to California was definitely a major culture shock for me. And there are certain attributes that are, you know, partially personal and partially cultural of the speed that I speak. I am not a fast mover. I actually process things slowly. When I'm in a classroom, I'm usually a little behind I'm always a little behind everybody. I have found that those are all strengths, but when I was in college, they were by certain professors who were using, I had some great professors, but I also had some professors who were using like the tough love technique, I guess, and telling me filmmaking was not the thing for me, that the industry moved too fast. I need to be much more ambitious. I'm not, that I should, anyway, and I believed them at the time, but I think out of necessity, it took me a long time to admit that I wanted to even do this because I was discouraged by so many people. And out of necessity, I had to redefine why I wanted to do this. And that even if they were all right and my personality was not conducive to this type of work, I could still do what I loved on my own terms. And for me, I really believe that is a huge reason why I am now working and getting paid for it. Because it forced me to this place where I had to tell myself, I had to stand up for myself, like, because I'm innately a pretty shy person. I hate networking. If I go to like, I was in film school in LA for a semester, and it felt like anytime a speaker came in to talk about how you make it in this industry, I would feel so anxious. Like it was like all this fear-based talk of
Wow.
what you have to do. Oh, you have to do, if you go to a networking party, like you have to I don't know. Everything was about networking and all the stuff that I hate. And it just filled me with so much anxiety that I was like, okay, well, if that's what it takes, I'm not going to, not going to make it in this industry.
Yeah.
I actually left LA and stayed in San Diego for 10 years, where that's where I was making short films just outside of the industry, because I knew it would eat me alive psychologically. But what I've learned over the course of making movies that I in my own way, that were just with friends, and it was all about the creative process and trying our best to enjoy that process together. Taking those films to little festivals, some really tiny festivals that were just, screens in community theaters, and it was and sometimes you're like watching your short film with literally, I drove like 4 hours to go to a festival to watch my short film with 3 people in the audience. But then you have one conversation with one other person who you've never met before, who watched your short, and they connect with something about it, and it's worth it. So I don't know. It's all to say that I think it's the same for any industry, because I know there's not only filmmakers potentially listening to this. Whatever you're getting into, define for yourself why you are on that route. Like, why do you want to do that? And I truly believe that in any industry, there are good people and like-minded people in that industry, even though it seems like there is an umbrella of maybe a little more cutthroat, nasty people. There are other people in that industry who are dying to meet somebody like you, who is able to stand up and say, this is who I am. I know it's not really like, but I was the shy guy in the networking meetings who just didn't really want to talk to anybody. And then I actually found that there were like 3 other shy people in those meetings, in those parties too, who were just standing in the corner, not really talking. And I'd start talking to them. And that became kind of the circle of people that I would interact with. And I found over my years doing this that I have over time created my own community of people who are like-minded and passionate about telling stories outside of all the silliness that this industry often pushes on you. So it's all to say, just don't listen to anybody who says you have to change who you are in order to be successful.
I think that's the best closing message anyone can have. And I think you're giving, like you mentioned, advice that's valuable, not just for aspiring creators, film students, but people in general, as especially young people who are in college and trying to figure out, their ultimate goal or journey professionally. It's really just, do it on your own terms and make sure you're true to you. So thank you for giving us your gift of time, for coming and speaking about this wonderful film that's both a true story, but also a narrative of among other things, joy, happiness, reconciliation, what it means to have faith and hope, that is so powerful that you can really change, the systems that you want to change, and also you can change the minds of some people. And I think that's really necessary for us to see in life, and also to see examples of what Brian Stevenson would say, just a little mercy. And so we were happy to have you, and thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thanks for such wonderful questions.
Yeah, and good luck to your current project. I know you can't talk too much about it, but good luck to you on that.
Yeah, it's actually been very fun. It's a really fun project to work on.
Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed this Q&A with the director of the film, Just Mercy, Destin Daniel Cretton. We look forward to seeing all of the other films that he has, and I hope you all take some time out to attend the other Weeks of Welcome events. Thank you again to Destin Daniel